Welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental issues that green up our world. Every year, the Washtenaw County Environmental Excellence Partnership Program recognizes local businesses. A shining example of this is Arbor Teas, founded 14 years ago by Aubrey and Jeremy Lopatin. They're here today to tell us about some of the ways they've made their company one of the most sustainable businesses in Ann Arbor. Aubrey and Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
So you wouldn't think a little cup of tea would make such a big difference to the world in terms of the environment, but when I look at your website at arborteas.com, it's amazing how many different things that you do to help make that cup of tea sustainable.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to have you here today to talk about, we're going to talk about energy use, solid waste, organic certification.
Great.
Lots of different impacts add up. So just to give people a little context, your company is on Main Street, right, in Ann Arbor?
Yep.
And how big is it? How many employees?
Yeah, we have a small warehouse down on North Main Street, so we're not a traditional brick and mortar store, but we sell online. We have about 7 employees total, and one of them is my aunt, who is a longtime volunteer at Arbor Teas. So.
Right. So you bring tea in from overseas in large quantities, and then you package it in small quantities, and then it goes back out. Is any of it sold overseas by chance? Or?
At this moment,
No,
we just
not
sell
currently.
within the United States.
Someday, right?
Someday, yeah.
So let's talk first about energy use, what you've done to reduce that. And I know you had the life cycle analysis of the tea process analyzed. So tell us about that.
So we worked several years ago now with students from the Center for Sustainable Systems at the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, and we asked them to look at sort of the full life cycle of tea so we could understand where we could make an impact.
What'd you find?
One of the things that they really zeroed in on was the flow of energy and energy usage across tea's lifespan. And you know, the most amazing finding was that the energy required to brew the tea by the consumer on a per pound or per unit basis is by far the most energy consumed.
Man, ever since you told me that, it has kind of changed my life. I mean,
Really?
Yes, I really am careful about how much I put in the tea kettle, or we now have one of those electric tea kettles, and same thing. I just make sure I only put in there what I'm going to use, because you're right, I never thought about it, how many times I've heated a whole pot for
Just to make one cup.
Right.
Yeah, crazy.
Absolutely.
And when you multiply that by people doing that all over the world every day, multiple times a day.
Exactly.
And then in terms of the building, you've got solar panels, right?
So in April, we expanded our facility to include another portion of the industrial suite that we were in. And at that time, we had the opportunity to make lots of enhancements and improvements physically. And one of them was adding solar to the property. And we are able to generate enough electricity from the solar array that we put on the building to take care of all of the electrical use of the operation.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that you're not covering, then I guess you have carbon offsets?
Absolutely, right. So we work with carbonfund.org in order to offset all of those emissions that we can't get rid of yet. And that includes transportation of the tea from origin to us, as well as from us to the customer themselves. So all of that transportation is offset through these carbon emission offset.
And that's a relationship that's been ongoing for over 10 years now.
Great. But there are some ways that you have been trying to reduce the fuel used in the transportation. Tell us about that.
Sure.
Absolutely. One of the ways is actually trying to prioritize sea freight over air freight for the transportation of the tea from origin to us. So most tea is not grown in the United States. Tea itself from the plant Camellia sinensis is a subtropical plant. It's native to Asia, and so most of it is actually grown abroad. And getting that from its origin to us takes a lot of energy. But one of the most efficient ways to transport it is through sea freight. So we prioritize that over air freight. Every once in a while, we're not able to do that. We have to do air freight. But by and large, most of our teas come to us by sea.
And changing packaging from big, bulky, heavy makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. So we also changed our packaging a few years back. We tried to figure out what was the least amount of material needed in order for that tea to be safely transported from us to the consumer, in order to cut down on fuel usage, in order to cut down on just material usage. And so what we recommend is we package it in this compostable packaging. The consumer receives it. As soon as they're ready to start using it, they open it up. They can transfer it to an airtight container if they so choose. If not, they can keep it in the packaging and put a chip clip on it. And then once they're done, they compost that package. And then when they're ready to refill, they can place their next order.
Great. You did mention to me that there are a couple types of teas that are domestically grown.
Yes, there are a few. So in the United States, we have a little bit of a misunderstanding of anything that's brewed in hot water we call tea. And true tea, as I mentioned, is from the plant Camellia sinensis. But there are all of these other things that we call tea: peppermint, chamomile, rooibos, all of these other herbal products, that some of which are grown in the United States. And then we put in hot water, we brew it, and then we drink it, and we call it tea. But peppermint is something that's domestically grown. Many of the mints are domestically grown in the United States. And then there are a handful of places, particularly in the southern United States and in Hawaii, that are actually growing Camellia sinensis. And so we do have a handful of organic teas that are grown here in the United States and are a great representation of what potentially could happen in the future.
Interesting. I suppose harvesting by hand would be less energy, but is that very common nowadays?
It is certainly.
It depends on the region. It depends on what type of tea is being manufactured. We tend to sell what are called orthodox teas, which are teas where there is a lot more hand and human involvement in the plucking and manufacture. But then there are really premium teas that are being made and have for a long time been made in Japan, where they do rely on a lot of mechanization, because that's just how they do it. They have labor constraints, and things need to be even more economical.
I suppose it depends on whether they're grown on mountain slopes or flat plains.
You'd be surprised. In Japan, they have mechanical harvesters that run on tracks along the contours of very steep slopes. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
They're pretty technically advanced over there.
But the premium teas that are grown in the United States, there's a lot of hand harvesting of those because they are a very upmarket product.
Well, the solid waste area, in terms of reducing what gets sent to the landfill in the life cycle of tea, that's where you guys really shine. I mean, it's amazing what you've done. And I know you're really committed to it because you both went through the Washtenaw County's Master Composter class.
Yes.
That's right. Yep.
And zero waste is your goal for the tea life cycle. So the packaging is just amazing what you've gone through. Like, for instance, tell us what you went through with the labels.
Sure. Yeah.
So the label, what our hope was to find a package that was completely compostable. And we learned very early on that we could find films that we could use to make the bag that we would then fill with the tea and transport it. But we couldn't afford to print 100 different versions of that bag for 100 different teas that we carried, which a lot of tea companies and other companies come to, and the solution is to have a label. So you have a bag printed and then you put an individual label. But we found very quickly that even though we could find a paper that was compostable for the label, we couldn't find an adhesive that was compostable. And so very quickly we learned that if you put on an adhesive that's not compostable, then all of a sudden your compostable bag is no longer compostable. Then, after working with several suppliers, we were able to finally come up with a compostable adhesive and put it onto a label, and then use that label for our packaging, which is what we use now. So, it's been years of trying new things and coming up with something that gets better and better and better with time.
And we were on this sort of perpetual search for that kind of holy grail compostable adhesive, because we knew that was going to be the solution to our packaging conundrum, and so we were constantly searching for it, and then did, in fact, as soon as it was kind of available on the market, get our hands on it. But because we were such early adopters, we really got to experience the early evolution of that product. I mean, and so how sticky the compostable adhesive has changed
science
as they
experiment
learned. Yeah,
it was too sticky, and it would actually stick to the backer, and we wouldn't be able to pull it off. And then it wasn't sticky enough where we would adhere it to our label.
Well, I admire your dedication to the cause, because that took some effort. And I really liked what you mentioned. You said not everything biodegradable is compostable, because an adhesive, even if it might have been broken down, it might not have been good for, like, for instance, a backyard composting pile or something.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that you're not putting any toxins into your compost pile, which you're then going to put potentially on your garden and grow vegetables in or whatnot. And part of the composting process is actually breaking down those toxins, which is great, but you don't want to actually introduce any toxins that can't be necessarily broken down. So we want to make sure that the bag itself is safe, and our bags actually can be used in vermiculture, so you can feed them to your worms if you want to. If you have vermiculture at home.
And your dedication to having a package that will break down in someone's backyard, as opposed to municipal composting, which you pointed out is totally more challenging for backyard composting.
Right. There's a lot of options, you know, in compostable, quote-unquote, materials that are made from, you know, all sorts of different products that can be, you know, thicker and more structural and involve zip tops and other things to enhance the package. But the thicker you get, the harder it is to break down in a composting situation, and you then end up needing, the only possible way to break it down is in a really hot composting situation that you would find in an industrial or a municipal composting facility. And most people can't achieve those kind of temperatures in their backyard compost heaps to break down that thick of a compostable plastic.
But yours you can?
Yeah, because we've kept it really thin.
That's great. And now organic, we have to talk about that, because your teas are all organic, right?
Yes, they're all organic certified.
Which is amazing. And organic means not using any synthetic herbicides or fertilizers. So what I'm wondering is, how can they keep the weeds down and keep the soil rich without these?
Sure. Well, organic certification, many people come to it for a variety of reasons, but one of the great things that it does is really emphasize soil health. And most organic farmers will actually tell you, I'm not actually growing tea, or I'm not actually growing an apple orchard. I'm just growing great soil.
I'm a soil farmer.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And whatever they grow in it is kind of extraneous to the soil health itself.
Interesting perspective.
And people will do a variety of things. They will use cover crops in order to reduce weeds, so they'll grow another crop that is lower than the plant itself, so that it doesn't take away any sunlight from the plant, but that it covers the ground so that there are no other weeds that can come up through it. Sometimes those cover crops are then harvested and used for other things. Sometimes they just stay there. Sometimes they're nitrogen fixers, which for tea is a great thing. You want to fix that nitrogen in the soil. And so we have seen tea farms use different peanut plants, for example. That will be low-grown peanut plants. We've also seen places use garlic, for example, in order to prevent some of the different bugs that might want to nibble on the plants. I've actually visited a tea farm in India that they took the vermiculture, and they took the, sometimes they call it the tea that comes from the vermiculture, and they'll spray it on the tea plants in order to improve health for the leaf itself, and also to keep away pests. So there's a variety of methods that can be used. And of course,
they just by nature also rely on more manual pulling of weeds. And what's really fascinating, when you go to these organic farms, you can spot the difference between an organic farm and a conventional farm, because the conventional farms will look super manicured and very clean and tidy. There won't be, you know, any patches of weeds coming up in between the rows of tea bushes and stuff like that. And you go to an organic farm, which they might be doing a lot to keep weeds down, either manually or through some of the ways Aubrey mentioned, but you know, they're not going to get it all, and it looks a lot more natural and a lot less manicured. And like, you know, to some people's eyes that might not look as pleasing, but when we see that, we know that they're actually walking the walk, you know. So
that's cool. And it's probably really great for habitat for pollinators, all kinds of birds and things.
Totally.
Biodiversity.
And all the way up the food chain, really. I mean, one of the gardens that we work with in the Darjeeling area in Northeast India has like territory that overlaps with big cats, you know, like, I mean, it's,
tigers?
which, tigers. And which is kind of wild, literally.
And a lot of them pride themselves on what wildlife they can attract. So they'll say, oh, we spotted this insect that has never been seen in our area for 10 years, and they get very excited and will promote that because they have been able to bring back some of the wildlife that may have left.
And I suppose all those cover crops help with erosion, because I've seen pictures of them on these steep slopes that must have
erosion is a huge problem in tea plantations, and so trying to really get healthy soil and the roots down deep into the ground so that the plants aren't just spreading their roots at the top of the soil but really going down is a really important thing.
So do you all visit these tea plantations?
Yeah, that's one of the perks of the job.
That's a lot of traveling.
It is. It is. We have 2 small children, so we don't get to travel as often as we want, but we certainly try to take every opportunity we can to visit the tea gardens that we work with directly and visit the areas and get a much more on the ground view of what's going on.
So you can make sure they're walking the talk.
Yeah. And also just to have a better sense of all the different pieces that go into it and have a better understanding of the people who also are there plucking and processing the tea.
It gives you a whole different level of appreciation when you get to see it in its origin, see the plant itself, learn more about how it is growing and producing this product, and then what you're really struck by is the hundreds of thousands and millions upon millions of people around the world whose employment is plucking tea.
Wow.
It's really pretty amazing. Yeah.
And to have it be organic, then it's healthier for them, the workers. And
Absolutely.
So I really commend what you're doing, and we're not the only ones to commend you because you're members of the Green Business Alliance and the International Green Industry Hall of Fame. You were inducted into that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So just really encourage the audience to go to your website at arborteas.com and learn more about what you're doing, because it's really wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And thanks so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
For an online archive of all our Green Room shows, go to ewashtenaw.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.